They thought she was just some girl with a big dog. That was their first mistake. It wouldn't be their last. The gravel lot outside Ketterman's Feed and Supply sat at the edge of Route 9, where the highway thinned out, and the nearest cell tower was a 20-minute drive back toward civilization. It was the kind of place that existed between things, between towns, between decisions, between the life you planned and the life that found you. At 7:15 in the evening, the sun had dropped behind the tree line, and the lot was painted in that flat, grey light that makes everything look a little more dangerous than it actually is. Mara Quinn pulled her truck to a stop near the far end of the lot and cut the engine. She sat for a moment the way she always did. Windows down, listening, old habit, the kind you don't unlearn. She was 29 years old and looked like someone who spent more time outside than inside, with dark hair pulled back, and the kind of calm in her eyes that either reassured people or unsettled them, depending on who they were. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, relaxed and still. In the passenger seat, Kodiak sat upright, ears already rotating like satellite dishes, reading something in the air that Mara hadn't caught yet. Kodiak was a Belgian Malinois, 73 pounds of lean muscle and focused intelligence, with a coat the color of burnt caramel and a scar running along his left shoulder from a night neither of them talked about anymore. He had served 4 years with the Naval Special Warfare Command before a shrapnel wound pulled him from active deployment. Mara had been his handler for all 4 of those years. When he was medically retired, there was never a question about what came next. She signed the paperwork the same afternoon. She opened the door, and he was already waiting beside the truck when her boots hit the ground. "Easy," she said softly. Not a command, just a word. Between them, he fell in at her left side, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his coat. The feed store's lights were still on inside. Through the front window, she could see old Gerald Ketterman behind the counter, moving slow the way he always did, stacking something on a shelf. She wasn't here for feed. She was here because 3 hours ago Gerald had called the number her uncle kept posted on a corkboard in his office. The number that meant something had happened that the sheriff's department was either too busy or too indifferent to handle. Gerald's granddaughter worked the evening shift. She hadn't shown up, and the last place she'd been seen was this parking lot. Mara wasn't law enforcement. Not officially, not anymore. But there were people in this part of the county who knew what she was capable of, and when things went sideways in the gaps between jurisdictions, her uncle's corkboard had a habit of getting consulted. She let Kodiak work the lot while she stood near the truck, watching him quarter the gravel in slow arcs, nose tracking low. He was a working dog still, retirement paperwork or not. You could put a dog like Kodiak in a civilian life, but you couldn't make him forget what he was. She was watching his tail, reading his body language the way she'd learned to read it in places that don't appear on standard maps, when she heard the truck. It came in fast, too fast for a parking lot, and pulled broadside across the entrance, blocking the only road out. 3 doors opened before it fully stopped. 3 men. Mara didn't move. The one who got out first was big, built wide across the shoulders, wearing a flannel shirt with the sleeves torn off despite the October chill. He had the kind of face that had absorbed a lot of bad decisions without seeming to learn from any of them. She clocked him, 6'2", maybe 240. The way he moved suggested he was used to his size, doing most of his talking for him. She would learn later that his name was Boyd Strickler and that he had an outstanding warrant in 2 counties. She didn't know that yet. She didn't need to. The second one was younger, maybe early 20s, with a jaw that worked a piece of gum, with the restless energy of someone who'd been running on too little sleep and too much something else. He hung back near the truck, hands in his pockets, watching the way a person watches when they think they're not being watched. The third one was the quiet one. That was the one she watched most carefully. He was average height, average build, wearing a grey hoodie with the hood down, and he moved with the flat, deliberate economy of someone who had been in real situations before. His eyes did a full scan of the lot before he was 3 steps out of the truck. He noted the positions of the overhead lights. He noted the sight lines to the feed store window. He noted Mara. He noticed she didn't step back. Boyd Strickler walked toward her like he owned the gravel. He stopped about 8 feet out, close enough to be a threat, far enough to feel clever about it. "That your dog?" he said. Mara looked at him without any particular expression. "Yes, nice dog." He smiled in the way that meant he didn't think so. "What's something like that worth?" "Not a conversation I'm having," Mara said. Boyd glanced back at the younger one with the gum. Some kind of shared amusement. He turned back to her. "You're at the wrong end of a long road, sweetheart," he said. "And your phone probably isn't worth much out here. So why don't we all just—" Kodiak made a sound. Not a bark, not a growl, just a single low note from somewhere deep in his chest, the kind of sound that stopped Boyd Strickler mid-sentence in a way that nothing else had managed to do in years. Mara didn't look at Kodiak. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what he was telling her. "Last time I'm going to say this," she said, and her voice was so level it was almost gentle. "Get back in your truck and leave." Boyd Strickler looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the quiet one in the grey hoodie. Something passed between them. "Or what?" Boyd said. "You gonna let the dog off the leash?" The younger one with the gum laughed. Boyd took 2 steps toward her. Mara said one word: Kodiak. What happened next lasted approximately 12 seconds, and it happened so quickly and with such total efficiency that the young one with the gum never actually processed it until it was already over. Kodiak launched from a standing position, with no wind-up, no telegraphing, no warning beyond the word he had been waiting for. He crossed the 8 feet between himself and Boyd Strickler in a fraction of a second and hit the man's weapon arm. Because Boyd had started to reach, which Kodiak had already known before Mara did, with a bite that locked on like a mechanical clamp. Boyd went down hard, more from shock than pain, though the pain was coming and it was significant. Mara was already moving. She didn't run toward the confrontation. She moved diagonally, cutting off the angle to the truck, putting herself between the quiet one in the grey hoodie and his exit. He had made his move at the same moment Boyd had, reached inside the front pocket of the hoodie, and in the 2 seconds it took him to process that the dog was on Boyd, and the woman was already inside his reach. It was already too late for the option he'd been planning. Her left hand redirected his wrist. Her right elbow did the rest. He went into the side of the truck and stayed there, hands suddenly not cooperating the way hands are supposed to. The young one with the gum ran. He made it about 40 feet before he tripped on the uneven gravel and went down on his palms, and by the time he scrambled upright and looked back, he saw Mara standing very still in the center of the lot, watching him go, and he made the best decision he'd made all evening, which was to keep running. She let him. Kodiak held Boyd Strickler on the ground with the patient authority of a dog who had done this in environments far more complicated than a gravel parking lot in rural Virginia. Boyd was not moving because Boyd had been told very clearly, in the only language Kodiak spoke when working, that moving would be a poor choice. Mara crouched down to be at eye level with him. "The girl," she said. "Gerald Ketterman's granddaughter. Where is she?" Boyd breathed through his nose in short, controlled intervals, the way people do when they're managing significant pain and trying to hold on to the last fragment of dignity they have left. "I don't know what you pulled into this lot 15 minutes after she stopped responding to texts," Mara said. "Your truck was seen on Route 9 at the same time she was. So let's skip the part where you tell me you don't know." She looked at him with the same expression she'd worn when he first walked toward her, calm, unhurried, without any particular anger in it. That absence of anger, Boyd Strickler would later tell the county investigator, was the scariest thing about her. "Storage facility," he finally said. "Old grain operation about 6 miles east. The Pullen Road turnoff. She's fine. She doesn't know anything. Mara stood up. She pulled out her phone. She had a signal barely 1 bar, and made a call that lasted 45 seconds. She gave the address. She gave a description of the third individual, the one who'd run. She gave Boyd Strickler's current status in terms that were precise and unemotional. Then she looked at the man in the grey hoodie, who was sitting against the side of the truck with his hands in his lap and a look on his face that suggested he was revising several assumptions about how the evening was going to go. "Don't," she said. He didn't. She stood in that lot with Kodiak at her heel for the next 22 minutes, until she heard the first siren coming down Route 9. Kodiak sat beside her, not at attention exactly, but present, the way he always was, aware of everything, ready for anything, and at the same time perfectly content to simply be there with her in the quiet of a darkening October evening. The deputies arrived first, then a vehicle with federal plates that she had half expected, because Gerald's granddaughter, it turned out, wasn't a random target. She worked part-time doing bookkeeping for a transport company, and that company had been moving things it shouldn't have been moving through this part of the state for the better part of 8 months. The girl had flagged an irregularity in the invoices 3 weeks ago. Someone had noticed that she noticed. The agent who got out of the federal vehicle was a woman named Diane Forsyth, and she looked at Mara and Kodiak and at the 2 men currently being placed in restraints, and said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "You former." "Yes, ma'am," Mara said. "Unit," Mara told her. Forsyth nodded once, slowly, the way people nod when something that confused them has just been explained. She looked at Kodiak. "He former too. Same unit," Mara said. Forsyth almost smiled. "Anybody hurt besides these 2, the third ran east on foot. He's probably on Pullen Road by now, working toward the grain facility. He'll be trying to clean up." Forsyth turned to one of her people and spoke quietly and quickly, and 2 of them were back in the vehicle and moving within 30 seconds. Gerald Ketterman's granddaughter. Her name was Callie, 19 years old, studying accounting at community college, who had done nothing wrong except pay attention to numbers that didn't add up, was found in a back room of the grain facility, unharmed, locked in, but unharmed, sitting on an overturned crate with her knees pulled to her chest and her eyes very wide. She was home by 10 o'clock. Mara heard this from her uncle, who called her while she was 40 minutes down the highway. Kodiak in the passenger seat again, ears relaxed now, one paw draped over the center console the way he did when he'd decided the work was done. "She's okay," her uncle said. "They found the third one too, and apparently those 2 you left in the parking lot are talking faster than anyone expected." "Good," Mara said. "Agent Forsyth wants to speak with you tomorrow. I'll call her." A pause on the line. Her uncle had known her since she was 7 years old, and he knew when to push and when to leave things alone. He left it alone. "You okay?" he said instead. Mara glanced over at Kodiak. He had his nose tilted toward the half-open window, reading the night air with the focused contentment of an animal who had done the thing he was built to do and found the world, for the moment, perfectly in order. "Yeah," she said. "We're good." She ended the call. The highway was dark and mostly empty, the kind of dark that exists in the spaces between towns, where the light pollution doesn't reach and you can see a low band of stars above the tree line if you know to look for it. She kept the window down and drove at an easy 60, not in any hurry. Kodiak shifted in the seat beside her, sighed once through his nose, and laid his head down on the console between them. She put one hand briefly on the back of his neck, just for a second. The scar under her fingers, the one she knew by feel now without thinking. She had been asked, more than once over the years, what it was like to trust an animal with your life. She'd never had a good answer for that, because the premise was slightly wrong. You didn't trust Kodiak with your life the way you trusted a piece of equipment or a procedure. It wasn't a calculation. It was something that had built itself, slowly, through 300 days in the field, and 2 deployments and 1 night in particular that she didn't speak about. the night where the math had stopped working, and the only thing that had cut through the noise was 73 pounds of Belgian Malinois refusing to leave her side. You didn't trust a dog like that, you just knew him, and knowing him was enough. They drove on through the dark Virginia night, the ghost and her wolf, fading back into the ordinary miles between places where no one was looking for either of them, and where the only sound was the wind through the window and the slow, steady breathing of a dog who was already half asleep.